When Christ calls a man, he bids him come and die. That chilling, or is it sobering, quote comes from Dietrich Bonhoeffer. And today we will learn more about the man, and more importantly, what he believes and why we must listen. Hi, my name is Terence, and I'm your host for Reading and Readers, a podcast where I review Christian books for you. Today I review Bonhoeffer Speaks Today, Following Jesus at All Costs by Mark Devine, 192 pages, published by B&H Books in November 2005. It's available in Amazon Kindle for $7.99 and through Faith Life for free. Only free in June, so you do have only a few more days left for this deal. Mark Devine is a professor at Beeson Divinity School in Birmingham, Alabama. He has taught at Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary in Kansas City and also served as a missionary in Bangkok, Thailand. So that's the profile which we can find in Amazon. In 4 words, who is Bonhoeffer? Well, Bonhoeffer is a pastor, martyr, prophet, spy. That actually is the title from Eric Metaxas' biography on Bonhoeffer. I'll share more about how Metaxas' book compares to Devine's later in this review, but for now those 4 words aptly describe the man, famously known as the pastor who was in a plot to assassinate Hitler. So Bonhoeffer is a man who really should be more famous than James Bond. Now, hopefully that whets your appetite to know more about him, and you can read all about his life in chapter 1 of Devine's book, from his early childhood years to his untimely execution, ordered by Hitler a few weeks before World War II ended. So just before Hitler, he knew he was going to lose, he was going to die, and he wanted to take Bonhoeffer out with him. So that's chapter 1 of the book. Then there are 4 other chapters. Chapter 2 is Knowing and Doing the Will of God. Chapter 3 is The Community of Believers. Chapter 4, Witness and Relevance. And chapter 5 is on freedom, suffering, and hope. The question this book answers is not who is Bonhoeffer. There are many good biographies around, and the standard in the field is Eberhard Bethges, I hope I pronounced that correctly, who was Bonhoeffer's close friend, fellow conspirator, and husband to Bonhoeffer's niece. So the book does not answer who is Bonhoeffer, rather the book answers the question, what does Bonhoeffer believe, and why does it matter for us today? So this is primarily not a narrative. The narrative is only in chapter 1, and that only serves as the explanation and testimony for Bonhoeffer's belief. A belief which Devine analyzes and calls the church, that's you and me, to listen in the remaining chapters. Now, Bonhoeffer is famous for this particular quote, which is, "Cheap grace is the preaching of forgiveness without requiring repentance, baptism without church discipline, communion without confession, absolution without personal confession." End quote. Cheap grace. When someone says Christianity is so very easy, you don't have to do anything. I mean, it's all free, isn't it? So there's no sweat, there's no trials. It's just a smooth sailing all the way to heaven. Now, when you hear that, you should think cheap grace. That's the phrase that Bonhoeffer coined. And Bonhoeffer says that there is a cost to discipleship. And that is the title of Bonhoeffer's book, where that quote was found. The cost of discipleship. And Devine quotes this in chapter 3, The Community of Believers. In that chapter, Devine also quotes from Bonhoeffer's booklet, Creation and Fall. So let me just read a bit of Bonhoeffer's words so that you get an idea of why this guy is someone that we should all pay attention to. Let me quote, "In man, God creates his image on earth. This means that man is like the Creator in that he is free. Actually, he is free only by God's creation, by means of the Word of God. He is free for the worship of the Creator. In the language of the Bible, freedom is not something man has for himself, but something he has for others. No man is free as such, that is, in a vacuum, in the way that he may be musical, intelligent, or blind as such. Freedom is not a quality of man, nor is it an ability, a capacity, a kind of being that somehow flares up in him. Freedom is not a quality which can be revealed. It is not a possession, a presence, an object, nor is it a form of existence, but a relationship and nothing else. Being free means being free for the other. End quote. So those are very powerful words, and those words can actually make one rethink what one thinks about, in this case, freedom. So I want to just confess over here that I have not read Cost of Discipleship. I have not read Creation and Fall. But I know enough of Bonhoeffer such that when Bonhoeffer speaks, when Bonhoeffer writes, I should listen, and if whenever possible, read. So that's why I look forward to reading today's book. Now, Devine does not merely cut and paste the best bits from Bonhoeffer's writings. This is not a book of quotations. There is a significant level of analysis, of integration. Consider this, just as a taster of what to expect in the book. We know as Christians that the sixth commandment is, thou shalt not murder. Now, as I said before, pastor and theologian Bonhoeffer was in a plot to assassinate Hitler. Now, some people have sought to cover Bonhoeffer by minimizing his involvement in the plot, saying that, well, he was not that involved. The others were more into the execution. No pun intended. The thing is that trying to cover for Bonhoeffer might have worked if not for the fact that Bonhoeffer's own words somewhat incriminate him. Devine writes, I quote, when Bonhoeffer speaks of having a clear conscience about his participation in the conspiracy to assassinate Hitler, he means something akin to the abandonment of self-justification in the matter. He means that he offers his decision to God for judgment. He means that he could no longer maintain a good conscience by attempting to keep his own hands clean while praying for the success of military and secular attempts to stop Hitler. End quote. Now, this is explosive stuff, because it would be nice if the world was just black and white and we just say that thou shalt not lie and we never lie. But what happens when Hitler asks you to betray your church members? Do you lie? How do we even think about all these things? So in this case, Bonhoeffer, pastor, theologian, he is part of a conspiracy. And he takes it seriously, you see. Some of us, we may say that, well, the end justifies the means. These are special circumstances. Bonhoeffer is one that lives only to follow the will of God. And he is willing to die in order to obey God. And that would actually, to him, include pacifism. He has written many things on pacifism, preached many things on pacifism, which is also why this part of his life is very contradictory. And he explores these things in his writings, and we can see some of it in what Devine writes in this book. So what does following Christ and resisting Hitler mean? How do you resist? How do you stop? What you can see is a wicked and evil government. And the reason why is that this is dangerous is this Bonhoeffer's action sanction violence as a means of solving problems, of a means of stopping maybe terrible things that the government is doing. So there is a lot of room for thought, and it's worth following through what Bonhoeffer thinks as a theologian about these things. This assassination is just one example of how everything comes together in this book. You have the dramatic background of Nazi Germany. You have the doctrinal rigor of top class from a top theologian. You have the decision to follow Christ. No turning back, no turning back. So you have all these things mixed together, and that makes the subject matter a very compelling read, because it's difficult, I think, to find all these combinations in any one person in the last, 100 years, if not a few hundred years. So Devine integrates all of them to discuss these topics. For example, church as a community. And when you talk about community, we are talking about living together under God's word. And we see Bonhoeffer did an experiment of living together under God's word. He has this underground seminary, and later on talks about community when he is doing prison ministry. And by that I mean that he is a prisoner and he is doing ministry with his fellow prisoners. So there's a lot of things here, and I would like to say also that Devine is not able to cover all the trivia, perhaps, or the interesting elements for the underground seminary, for the assassination, and so on. He is more interested in extracting the theological aspects and trying to make sense of it within the life. All right, so within the life. Now let me just quote one of what Devine writes, so you get a sense again of how he analyzes. I quote, "It is right for the Christian prisoner or missionary or exiled apostle to yearn for contact with fellow believers. The absence, not the presence, of such longings will call into question one's relationship to Christ. We were made for one another, and our relationship with Christ includes our divinely created and sustained connection to one another. It is a life-giving, mutually interdependent connection, as described in 1 Corinthians 12. For Bonhoeffer, we misunderstand the constituent role of the community for the Christian life if we reduce it to a means for our individual enjoyment of other supposed blessings. Though not simply wrong, it is a distortion to think of the church as mainly the path to the benefits of knowing Christ." End quote. So again, lots of things to think about over here, but definitely ecclesiology is something that Bonhoeffer has thought about, lived through, and what he has produced is analyzed here. And I urge you to consider reading Course of Discipleship or Life Together or any of the Bonhoeffer books, as this book, today's book, Devine's book, may actually be a starter pack for you to actually look into the other Bonhoeffer writings. Now the thing is, and this is a strange thing, evangelicals reluctantly talk about Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and I don't understand why. Sometimes when I read something, it mentions Bonhoeffer. Then that author would quickly issue a disclaimer saying that we don't believe everything that Bonhoeffer believes. Now really there's no need to say that, because nobody believes everything that anybody believes, but there seems to be an effort to distance oneself from Bonhoeffer. There was a time I remember watching a video, and R.C. Sproul was kind of commending Bonhoeffer, but at the same time issuing that same disclaimer. Bonhoeffer has doctrines that we disagree. When I came to Devine's book, I was hoping that systematic analysis of Bonhoeffer's theology, or topical analysis rather, would answer the question, why are evangelicals so careful around Bonhoeffer? Because this is a question that has been bugging me for a while. Devine writes of the disproportionate welcome Bonhoeffer has received among progressivist Christians, and oftentimes in this book, he wants to show how Bonhoeffer would have responded to those liberal doctrines. So Devine writes, I quote, Theological liberals and progressives may chafe at the exclusive claims of Christ belonging to ancient Orthodox biblical Christian witness, but Bonhoeffer did not. So there's a contrast here between the liberals, the progressives, and what Bonhoeffer actually believes. And in another part of the book, Devine writes, against sanguine and optimistic estimations of human nature so prominent within liberal and progressive theologies, Bonhoeffer took a dim view of humanity in its natural state. Again, this is a contrast from what liberals believe and what Bonhoeffer truly believed. Now, if I might say so, I come away from the book knowing what Bonhoeffer firmly believes, but still not knowing how or why the liberals and the progressives welcome Bonhoeffer, because I just don't know what they are reading. Why is it that they welcome Bonhoeffer more than evangelicals? I feel that in this book, to find the answer to that, I have to read between the lines, because when he asserts, when Devine asserts what Bonhoeffer believes, therefore liberals must have thought otherwise. But I still don't know where they're getting it, you see. I don't know how could they misinterpret, would that be the correct word? How could they misinterpret, or how could they pick and choose from Bonhoeffer that would lead liberals to see Bonhoeffer as a possible champion for their ideology or teachings? You see, the thing about this book is I wish I was led down a garden path. I mean, Devine could have given me a Bonhoeffer quote, then he would give me a liberal take on that quote, make me uneasy, make me feel very disturbed by what I'm reading. Let me wonder and question, if this is true, then imagine the consequences. Does Bonhoeffer really believe in this? And just when the tension is at its breaking point, I want Devine to just release me from my misery. Give me then another quote from Bonhoeffer that not just dismiss that liberal theology or that liberal interpretation, but give me a way to see that there is a way to resolve the tension. Okay, there's an interpretation that resolves the tension such that it clarifies both passages from Bonhoeffer. So, in short, I'm looking for drama. And to some of you who think that, well, do we really expect drama from a book on theology? And isn't drama a form of ugly showmanship when we should just appreciate the purity of the thought? I quote to you in response Dorothy Sayers, "It is the dogma that is the drama." Now, speaking of drama, a writer who understands the drama of Bonhoeffer's life is Eric Metaxas. He wrote Bonhoeffer, pastor, martyr, prophet, spy. After finishing that book, I was thinking, why did he not include theologian? Because that would probably be how Bonhoeffer describes himself and how many people would describe Bonhoeffer. But theologian, unfortunately, would just ruin that catchy title. Now, I give Metaxas' book an A for storytelling. It was my very first introduction to the man Bonhoeffer, and that book made me cry and made me love him for his life in full obedience to our God. I would give Devine a B or maybe a high C for storytelling, because I think there are opportunities where Devine in the book could have inserted a form of a cliffhanger. He could have paused a moment using the storyteller's style or devices to increase the tension in the pages. But Devine, having said that, he doesn't really have that many pages. Metaxas had a whole book to flesh out the drama. Devine only had one chapter to do so, and he had to compress so many events in so many important events in Bonhoeffer's life that I don't blame him for not being able to pull it off. But there is better drama, as I would say in Metaxas' book, which I'm emphasizing, because if you want an introduction to Bonhoeffer, Devine is probably not the book for you. It just goes through the life of Bonhoeffer so fast, so quickly, that it just reads as, he does try. I'm not saying that it's a bad book. That's why I'm giving it a B or high C for storytelling. But if you really want something exciting, then you should read Metaxas. The thing that Devine has over Metaxas is that Devine's book it's not about the man so much, but it's about the man's belief. And that belief is our belief. Maybe. But if it is our belief, then we must listen. So Devine has given us in this book plenty of substance, plenty of material, well written, well argued, well studied, okay? But I just wish there was a little bit more drama so that we can see the weighty consequences expressed as, cliffhangers. So because those cliffhangers that we see in Bonhoeffer's past, we can also see in our present life. The consequences of not obeying God, and also the realities of that we do, if we are to follow Christ, there is indeed a cost. And what it means to be in the church, and for suffering, and for hope. So all these things are themes that are ever present in Bonhoeffer's life and writings, and they are ever present in ours too. Now, I don't know whether it probably is a bit too soon to use the Ocean Gate submersible tragedy as an illustration. For one thing, we don't even know what was the cause of the implosion of the submersible as it went down to look at the Titanic shipwreck. But because the submersible tragedy is still so vivid, I want to do something with it, and I will draw some principles so it doesn't rely on the details of the tragedy. The tragedy, I think, is a good illustration of how one man can have a rock-solid conviction that his process work, the innovation process, that his product is safe. Consider this. To prove that he was in the submersible, going down nearly 4,000 meters under the sea. He himself believed it with all, he bet his life on it. But all the talk and all the conviction and assurance and all the gestures and all that, in the end, when you face reality, it looks like it was a flawed, untested vehicle. And basically, the laws of physics just doesn't care about conviction, isn't it? Because what is right, what is true, is still true no matter what you believe. So here's the thing. If we can consider that when a man can have rock-solid conviction on a particular interpretation of the Bible, and he is sure that his teaching is safe before the eyes of the Lord, before the throne of God. And he may even be willing to go into the submersible, go into his teaching, and submerge all the way down to the depths, being tested. The thing is that, does it really work? Are you willing to join him in that trip underwater? And I would say that the story of Bonhoeffer is compelling because his life and his teaching, which integrate so well in the sense that his consistency is admirable, and his teaching was tested under unimaginable pressure. It's crazy pressure when you really look into the life of Bonhoeffer. That's why chapter 1 of this book is so important. Otherwise, everybody can talk, but Bonhoeffer is the very few who can actually walk the talk. And he compels us to follow him. Now, let me just, before I end, I want to share with you a passage that provoked much thought in me. Let me quote. Many aspiring scholars pursuing the doctorate chafed at the ministry requirement that then prevailing at Berlin and found ways to check off the ministry box as quickly and painlessly as possible. Not Bonhoeffer. Once his catechetical students outgrew the Sunday class, Bonhoeffer started a Thursday reading and discussion group in order to maintain his ministry among them. Papers on religious, historical, economic, and political subjects were presented by Bonhoeffer. They enjoyed field trips together, spending hours together during which these youth, many from Jewish families including several atheists, would speak their minds and challenge their teacher, who patiently answered their questions. Many of these students continued to correspond with Bonhoeffer across the years. Nearly all of these students would die in Hitler's war or in the concentration camps, as would their kind teacher." End quote. So how do you respond to that? All these young youths taught by Bonhoeffer, and then most of them ended up dead. There is profound sadness, yes. But these are my reflections. But is it a tragedy? Or is it a triumph? Is this the outcome that we want our Sunday school teachers to aim for? Our Sunday classes to aim for? I mean, does our Sunday classes prepare our youth, children, men and women, to die for Christ? If Bonhoeffer's teaching is such that it makes Christ's commands clear, stark, clear, and compelling, do we want more of it? We are sad at the deaths, of these students of Bonhoeffer. But I was thinking that imagine if all of Germany at that time were as diligent in their Bible study and as committed to Jesus as Lord. In such a Germany, Hitler might never have been Hitler. The world's most famous spy, if you ask anyone, they'll probably name James Bond. In a just world, Dietrich Bonhoeffer would be more famous than James Bond. Bond is make-believe. Bonhoeffer is real. Bond gets in a machine gun car, and goes against campy, creepy, sometimes cool villains. Bonhoeffer gets on the radio and he calls Hitler a Verführer, a misleader. He insults Hitler on national radio. Bond lives, dies, and comes back on screen. Bonhoeffer lives, dies, and his reward for total obedience is life forevermore. So why does the world know and care about Bond, James Bond, when they really should be listening to Dietrich Bonhoeffer? Indeed, what more must a man do before the world will finally listen? This is a reading and reader's review of Bonhoeffer Speaks Today, Following Jesus at All Costs by Mark Devine, 192 pages, published by B&H Books in November 2005. It's available in Amazon Kindle for $7.99 and through Faith Life for free, and only free in June. And there are only a few more days left. Another free book is from Logos, and that is R.C. Sproul's The Consequences of Ideas, Understanding the Concepts That Shaped Our World. I won't be in time to release a review this month for this free book. I hope to do so next month. And wouldn't it be terrible if you heard my review and decided that I would really want to read that book, but unfortunately the deal is over. I would have to pay the full price for it. Actually, that might not be such a bad thing. Well, until next time, bye-bye.